Turkey prepares for what could be the most important vote in its modern history. But critics at home and abroad claim Turkey's democracy is taking a turn for the worse. We debate whether that's fair. I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Turkey's president knows a thing or two about winning elections. Recep Tayyip Erdogan has never lost a vote. But is that because he's wildly popular or willing to do whatever it takes to remain in power? His critics accuse him of silencing the opposition, particularly in the wake of a failed coup 2 years ago, which saw tens of thousands arrested and media outlets shut down. But Erdogan supporters say those developments were not only justified, but necessary to bring stability back to the country. This election will usher in a new presidential system, a change which will give the head of state increased new powers. This too has drawn international criticism. And despite those changes being voted for in a referendum, Turkey has been accused of being on the path to dictatorship. So, are the accusations justified? Sandra Gartman reports.
Turkey's voters are weighing up a basket of issues before heading to the ballot box. The economy, education, security, and terrorism. But in many ways, the upcoming vote has a lot to do with this man, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
One of the concerns of international observers is that this election will usher in a new presidential system that critics say concentrates too much power with the president. Turkey, though, did vote for that new system in a referendum last year. But it was a very narrow win, and this country is still hugely divided on the issue.
A presidential system will be better for this country, because we have been trying with a parliamentary system for 80 years, and it wasn't successful.
We don't trust it at all, because all the power goes only one person. Even I can't give to my father or to my mother that much power.
You wouldn't agree to a scenario where Demirtas had that same power?
No, definitely not. Nobody shouldn't have that much power.
It's by appointment, so
but one MP running for the ruling AK Party says there's no power shift at all.
The people who are trying to portray Turkey as going on a path which is more authoritarianism because of the new system is basically, I would say, they haven't looked into the system. Because in the system it is clear-cut said that Parliament has the only power to legislate. The only difference is that the budgetary law can be put forward by the President. And also the calling of elections. If President, for example, decides, well, we need elections in the country, then also Parliament is going to election. Or if the Parliament says, look, we have the majority and we want to go for an election, and we decide on an election, the decision is taken to go to an election, then again the President also goes to election.
To his supporters, President Erdogan's political control so far has brought success and stability. He's praised for restoring rights to the country's majority Muslim population, steering Turkey's economic boom, pursuing terror groups like Daesh and the PKK, and defeating an attempted military coup in 2016. But Turkey's state of emergency and the tighter security that comes with it have also been criticized. Since the failed coup, more than 100,000 soldiers, judges, teachers, and journalists were suspended from their jobs, accused of having links to groups like the PKK or the Fethullah terrorist organization known as FETÖ. Nearly 30,000 people have been jailed. Some still have ongoing trials. Erdogan's critics say the net was cast far too wide.
We believe that now the FETÖ members are not getting arrested. They don't use that state of emergency power to catch FETÖ's member. Yeah, many of them in the jail, but they use that power for the shouting the opposition.
But Erdogan's unrivaled level of support and position of power is actually a source of pride for AK Party supporters. This campaign truck reads, "A great Turkey requires a strong leader."
The difference here is he has won every election and every referendum that he has put forward to the people. You can see there is a trend in Turkey of the opposition of trying to labeling people who have been in power, have been in power for a certain time, as being too strong. If you go from that point of view, you should be looking at Europe, because there are some prime ministers or heads of government who have been elected more than 3 times.
The polls point to a tight race, and the ruling AK party knows it has a fight on its hands. Whoever wins will have the tough job of steering this divided nation ahead. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Cem Toker. He's the former chairman of the opposition Liberal Democratic Party, and Matthew Breiser. He's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a former U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan. Also with me in studio is Onur Erim. He's an international policy analyst and a former AK Party advisor. And in Washington, D.C., we have Lawrence Korb, or Larry Korb. He's a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense and now a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Gentlemen, good to have you on the program. Good to have this debate. I'm going to ask you all the same question to begin with. Let me start with Onur Erim. Is Turkey sliding towards dictatorship?
If by that you're asking if Turkey is sliding towards dictatorship via Erdogan's rule, party rule, or as a president in power, I don't think so. I don't think you could make this claim for a politician that has gone to elections, I guess, 9 or 8 times already in the last 16 years. For a person that is constantly getting its right to rule with an overwhelming majority under the new system, and hopefully with this Sunday as well. I don't know if you could make the claim that it's moving towards dictatorship.
Okay, so it doesn't check out for you. Matthew Breiser?
Yeah, dictatorship is a strong word, and clearly by, I'm sure President Erdogan's own account, he would recognize that there's been backsliding on democratic freedoms. I mean, there's a state of emergency, which you know, he talks openly about. But I do not feel Turkey's sliding toward a dictatorship. As you said, elections matter. They really matter here. And whereas in the past the ruling AKP could gain a controlling stake of the Turkish parliament with a victory of 35% of the vote, they now need 50% of the votes plus 1. So democracy is still alive. It may be a peculiar form here. And what really matters in terms of whether Turkey would ever slide toward democracy is what happens after this election.
Cem Toker, democracy is alive and well. Turkey's not sliding towards dictatorship, according to the other 2 guests. What do you think?
I disagree.
Tell me why.
Well, by definition, if you look into Cambridge, any dictionary in the world, will tell you, will define dictator or a dictatorship as someone holding all political power to himself and by himself. And that is the case in Turkey, without any separation of powers and without any checks and balances. And the fact that a country holds elections frequently doesn't make it a democracy. Putin holds elections.
Sure.
Mubarak held elections every 4 years, but he was in power for 30 years. Presidential elections, parliamentary elections in Azerbaijan. Aliyev holds elections.
Okay, so realistically, let me ask you, is it possible after this election that the AKP could lose control of parliament, A? And is it possible that President Erdogan, especially if it goes to a second round, could lose the presidency?
I don't see how. No.
It's not possible?
It is not possible.
So why are they all campaigning?
Well,
why is the CHP so energized?
Well,
why
it's
is
a circus.
PE party?
Because
It's a circus. So you don't believe in this system?
Current system, I cannot call it a democracy.
Is it
I cannot
rigged or
call it
is it not?
fair, open, just, democratic elections. You can hold
so you don't see it as fair.
elections
Okay.
every Sunday if you want. That does
Right.
not make you a democracy.
Okay, interesting point. Larry Korb, is Turkey sliding towards dictatorship?
Well, I think that they're moving in that direction. The real question becomes what happens if Erdogan's party loses control of the parliament this year. Will he allow himself to have checks and balances, or will he continue to arrest people who disagree with him, or will there be any fixing of the ballots? In other words, if he loses votes from the Kurds, which he used to do very well with. But now, given what's happened in Syria, will he lose support for those? Will he try and make it out that he got more? So I think that's the real question. They're at an inflection point, and we'll see what happens, particularly after this election, and how many votes he gets the first time. I don't think he's going to get a majority the first time.
So you said you don't think he's going to get a majority. Well, he can't be a really good dictator then, can he? If he's not going to get the votes? That's democracy, isn't it? He's doing a bad job of being a dictator if he might not get the votes.
Well, I agree, but the real question is, what does he do then? Okay, if he doesn't get the votes and you have a runoff and he wins, and what happens after that? Will he try and lock up more of his political opponents as he has in the past?
Okay.
And will he allow himself to have the parliament to have checks and balances?
Okay, but have you got any evidence that he has locked up political opponents that have defeated him in an election straight after an election?
Well, I have evidence that he's locked up an awful lot of people, okay, over the years, you know, without trials. And so the question is, could have been potential political opponents.
Okay. Onur Erim, let's look at it from another perspective. What if dictatorship's not the way to look at it, but others look at rolling back of democratic rights? So, for example, Amnesty International, in their annual report 2017-18, says the ongoing state of emergency set a backdrop for violations of human rights. Dissent ruthlessly suppressed, with journalists, political activists, and human rights defenders among those targeted. Instances of torture continued to be reported, and they speak about, since the failed coup attempt of July 2016, they don't like what's been going on in Turkey. Would you concede then that, yes, democracy is still alive and healthy, but there are big question marks over the health of the democracy? Is that fair?
Well, I mean, for those of us living in Turkey, especially for those like myself, a Turk living in Turkey, it is sometimes hard for us to comprehend the level of democracy that people enjoy in countries like the United States. You know, we unfortunately, in some cases, during some history, and maybe still to some degree, lock up people maybe for no reason, without a trial. You know, we don't have places like Guantanamo Bay in Turkey, unfortunately, that we could do this outside of Turkey. We do it inside Turkey. But let's put this aside for a second. The biggest problem is, and yes, I do agree that there are some problems in Turkish democracy and Turkish justice system, as there have been for the years. But we have to explain and look into everything as before July 15th and after July 15th. Now, those things, issues, problems that delivered us to the point of July 15th was also due to some of the inner problems in Turkey. Turkey allowing a lot of fetoists into the system,
right,
and things as such. But we have to look at everything and assess everything before and after July 15th. Has things gone a little bit worse since July 15th? Yes, but it had to get a little bit worse to get better.
Okay, Cem Tüker, let me ask you this question then. It's a hypothetical, but it's sincere. I'm not trying to trick you here. If in a first round, President Erdogan doesn't get more than 50%, we go to a second round, and he loses.
Right.
Say, for example, to Muharrem Ince. You're still going to think the system was rigged?
I'll eat my words then. Simple as that. But that's a hypothetical question. I usually don't answer hypothetical questions. But if that happens, then I'll backtrack and reevaluate the situation.
But is there no amount of value that you can attribute to the millions of Turks who will go to the polls this weekend and possibly even beyond, who sincerely want to vote for whoever they want to vote for, whether it's President Erdogan or anybody else?
Let me tell you this. An election is the last indicator of a democracy. In a democracy, you have rules and institutions independent from political parties, such as this institution, TRT, or Rütük, that's overlooking the entire television system.
And we're responsible to the taxpayers.
Constitutional court.
And we're accountable to the taxpayers.
Right.
We're having this debate. We're discussing it. Isn't that a good thing?
Yeah, it's an exception. You know your record, it's in the press, how much coverage time you have provided to certain parties. I am an opponent. I was an opponent party leader for 12 years. You know how many times I was in the studio, despite the fact that I participated, my party participated in 2007 elections, 2011 elections, 2 referendums, 2009 local elections, 2014 local elections, 2015 twice. You know how many times I was in the studio? One time.
Okay, so Matthew Bryza, has there been an uneven playing field when it comes to the different parties?
Well, yeah, under a state of emergency, right? The rules, the normal rules are suspended. Yeah, we have Mr. Demirtas, who is imprisoned right now. And clearly, we just heard from Canbay that it's been difficult for opposition parties to get their voices heard. Now, there is this 10 minutes that, that each political party leader is allocated, but
provided by General Evren. He
made
made that law.
By General Evren. Really?
He passed that law, yeah, the coup leader.
Yeah. So, but my last point I wanted to make is, if you look at what happened in the referendum, yes, the political system here changed to be a presidentially dominated system, and the actual powers of President Erdogan are not all that different from those of the U.S. president, right? It's a strong presidency. What hasn't happened here, you have not seen opposition leaders flourish, and leaders, especially of the major opposition party, who really wanted it, who really wanted to lead. It's a big criticism of the CHP leader, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu. Now there is a candidate, Mr. Ince, who seems ready to try to lead. So when I said what matters is what happens after this election, I mean that he will have a chance to try to build a vibrant opposition party headed by somebody who really wants to compete. That will be a new era in Turkish politics.
But you think President Erdogan is going to win?
I do.
Yeah. So, Onur, I passed through Beşiktaş on the weekend, just got off the ferry coming from the Asian side. It was very vibrant, a lot of opposition supporters. You had HDP supporters, CHP supporters, E-Party supporters, campaigning, young people, and so forth. Cem believes all of that's a circus, and those people are being involved in a system that is rigged against them. What's your response to him?
We may discuss, agree or disagree on many parts of this government to be democratic or otherwise. But I think if you look at the history of Turkish elections and the reaction of the people, you will see that the elections in Turkey are probably the most fairest and most democratic of all institutions in Turkey. Let's just believe for a second that bin Laden hasn't been killed and was in a prison serving a life sentence in the US. If you can name me one major presidential nominee that would come out in the States, say that we will bring out bin Laden and put his statues all over, that all of...
So who are you referring to here?
Demirtas, of course.
Yeah, but in terms of who was he talking about?
Demirtas is not in prison because there is a state of emergency in Turkey. Demirtas wasn't put into prison 2 weeks ago. He was put in prison 20 months ago. Now, we could sit here and discuss that and to me, it's unbelievable either, that to have somebody without a court case for 20 months is unbelievable. Right. It's unjust. Yes, that is correct. But Demirtas is there for having put clear support for PKK and having shown clear and absolute support for Abdullah Öcalan, who's a convicted terrorist leader, serving more than one life sentence.
Is that the comparison you were making, Öcalan?
That's exactly what. So if you can show me one nominee in the future, a major presidential nominee in the U.S., then I would say yes, the democracy level that we are enjoying here is not that great. But as I said, I'm not talking about the entire government, but the most fairest and most democratic institution of democracy that we've been enjoying for over the years, except for with the exception of 1983, when the referendum was held for the new president after the coup. We have enjoyed many good times with the elections.
So Cem, there are those who say Demirtas shouldn't be in jail, and there are those who say he's in jail for support of the PKK, and despite all of that, the man still got his 10 minutes because he's running for president.
Well, he should have, because he wasn't convicted. If there was rule of law in Turkey, he would have been either released or been convicted. His trial should have been over by now.
Should some credit be due then, that the man's up there, his posters are up there, and he's still running for president, even though he's in jail?
He's not convicted. A man is innocent until proven guilty. Have anybody heard this in Turkey? Have you?
Do you believe that's under question?
That is a basic principle of law since Romans. But it hasn't stopped by in Turkey, that concept. A man is innocent until proven guilty.
If he's convicted, would you
If he's
support the
convicted, then he can appeal it, take it wherever he wants.
So the justice,
due process,
you trust the justice system.
Due process of law.
But you trust the justice system then?
Don't put words in my mouth.
I'm saying, you said if he's convicted, you'd accept that, right?
I would, but I should also point out, in the Rule of Law Index, worldwide, put out by the Economic Forum, and the impartiality and independence of the judiciary, Turkey ranks dismally with African dictatorships.
Right.
So, that's it.
Okay, so...
I rest my case.
Okay, Larry Korb, do you want the opposition to win?
Well, I think what we want in the United States is a fair and open election that puts people in there who are subject to checks and balances. Obviously, and I think that from the discussion, it's clear Turkey is moving away from that. The real question now, this is an inflection point. What will happen from here on in? Will Erdogan, in a sense, be, president for life? Will he continue to do things that weaken his opposition? And as just been pointed out, when you look at the index of democracy, now no democracy is perfect, but Turkey is going the wrong way from what it used to be. I remember when I was in government, we used to tell the people in the Muslim world, you've got two models here. You've got the Turkish model, you've got the Iranian model. Which way do you want to go? I don't know if I could do that anymore in terms of what's happened under Erdogan.
Okay, Onur, is that fair? Does Turkey have an image problem now? It's not even seen as a model now for the United States to show others the way?
I don't think anybody could argue otherwise, that especially in the West and the U.S., that Turkey has been being attacked with an image problem. Now, is there some right to this, that they're attacking? Yes. Is it as much as that we are suffering from this? I don't think so. Now, we have to realize most of the image makers of Turkey for the past 12 years were held by FETÖ members. When you take them out of the equation, and when actually they're working against you, I think it played a lot of role with Turkey's bad image problem since 2012, 2013. And Turkey, unfortunately, the government has not been successful enough to send out new people to, clear this image, talk about the right things. The last time I was in D.C. was about 4 months ago, where, again, we're suffering probably the most problems when it comes to image. And I actually heard this more than a few times, that, hey, we talked about issues, they asked questions, and they said, you know what, you're the first guy we have been seeing for the last couple of months talking something about pro-Turkey. So, yes, Turkey has been suffering a lot of image problem. Again, this has a lot to do with when, especially in the U.S., FETÖ members were holding. Unfortunately, they were given this job, whether officially or not. They were given this job to do Turkey's image making in D.C. And when you take them out of the equation, and when they are working against you with all their connections, with all their grassroots
they helped with
events,
soft power in the past, but now they're...
And unfortunately, the government has not been doing maybe even anything to do this for the last 2 or 3 years.
Cem Toker, do you have a problem with the powers of the presidential system?
Powers?
Yeah,
unchecked powers, unlimited powers. Without any checks and balances, it's not a presidential system.
Would you trust, for example, Meral Aksener with those powers?
She doesn't want those powers. She publicly said that. She wants to go back to the parliamentarian. I am all for the presidential system. I represent the only party in Turkish politics since 1994, quarter of a century, asked for the presidential system because it brings a more stable system. But what they brought on April 16th last year is anything but presidential system. So, what's his name? Ince. He wants to go back to parliament. Rather than do that, he should, if he can separate the powers, as he says, He doesn't want any judges standing up before him. He's going to pull out the Minister of Justice from the Judges Council, Prosecutors. If he can do those, he can separate the powers. He can get his powers checked and balanced by the other two, legislative and judiciary. Then we're talking about a good presidential system. Then I don't have any problems with that. But Erdogan wouldn't do that.
Okay. Well, let's see. The vote's coming up. These are fascinating times in Turkey, and I'm really glad and privileged to have this conversation with all of you. Jim, Matthew, Onur, and Larry, I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still to come on the Newsmakers, Macedonia agrees to change its name after signing an historic deal with Greece. But why are nationalists on both sides so unhappy? And Romania's government demands judicial reform, but will adapting it mean dodging it? Macedonia and Greece appear to have ended a decades-long dispute over a name. The two countries signed a landmark agreement which paves the way for a newly named Republic of Northern Macedonia. It may not sound like a significant change, but the impact could be huge. Athens has long used its veto power to keep Macedonia out of the EU and NATO. But if the deal is ratified, Greece says it will no longer object. But while the two leaders are rejoicing, many in Greece and Macedonia are not. Protests erupted in both countries, with Greeks calling the deal a national betrayal and Macedonians angry there was even a discussion in the first place. For more, here's Shoaib Hassan.
It's a dispute that soured relations between Greece and the Republic of Macedonia for nearly 3 decades, over a shared name and legacy, particularly that of Alexander the Great. But now a landmark deal may bring that to an end, after an agreement between Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras and his Macedonian counterpart Zoran Zaev on Sunday.
Οι τελευταίοι συμφώνησαν να αλλάξουν τη συνταγματική τους ονομασία για όλες τις κρίσεις και έναντι όλων. Συμφώνησαν να μετονομάσουν τη χώρα τους σε Δημοκρατία της Σεβέρνα Μακεδονία, δηλαδή στη γλώσσα μας, σε Δημοκρατία της Βόρειας Μακεδονίας.
The dispute began when Macedonia declared itself independent from a fracturing Yugoslavia in 1991. Greece immediately objected to the name, saying it would fuel territorial aspirations over its own region of Macedonia. It also objected to what it described as Macedonia's claims over the strategic port of Thessaloniki, as well as over the legacy of Alexander the Great. The dispute resulted in Athens blocking Macedonia's entry into the EU, as well as NATO. Those memberships may now soon be reopened for Skopje, as Athens has agreed to drop its opposition following the agreement. The deal still has to be ratified by the Macedonian parliament, followed by a national referendum, and must once again be presented to the Greek parliament for final ratification. But with a dispute that runs this deep, there will always be dissenting opinions.
There is only one Macedonia, and it is Greek. We will not give it away to anyone. Macedonia is filled with the blood of Greek warriors, Macedonian warriors.
We're facing the worst surrender and capitulation that ever could happen to us. That is the agreement he signed on the change of our name of centuries.
Greek opposition parties are already out in protest, and Macedonia's president has threatened to veto the bill even if it is cleared by parliament. Will internal politics in both countries derail the deal? Or will the leaders be able to clear the hurdles to end animosities? Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Let's discuss this now. In favor of Macedonia's name change is Peter Azovski. He's a public relations strategist and political analyst in Skopje. Opposing the name change from Toronto is Bill Nikolov. He's the president of the Macedonian Human Rights Movement International. And completing our panel from Heidelberg, Germany, we have Achilles Skordas. He's a former advisor to the Greek Parliament on international legal affairs. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Bill Nikolov, let me start with you. The foreign ministers meet, they sign a deal, the prime ministers agree on the deal, they call it historic. They say this is a major step in ending a 27-year dispute. It's win-win for everyone, isn't it? What's your problem with it?
It denies my right to exist. So win-win, I wouldn't call it. And off the top, I was referred to as a nationalist, but don't worry, I've been called worse. I'm Macedonian, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights defends my right to exist. The West claims to uphold all these human rights conventions, so why am I always under attack for being Macedonian from Macedonia? My ethnic identity is who I am. The name of my country is who I am. So calling it a win-win is just quite offensive, to be honest with you. And again, in terms of technical aspect, the Prime Minister of Macedonia, well, I will add the illegitimate Prime Minister of Macedonia, but he signed a symbolic agreement. He has no right to unilaterally change the name of a country, number one. Number two, he would have to actually take it to Parliament. Number three, there would be a referendum. Number four, President Ivanov already announced that he would veto it. And of course, let's not forget that he violated the Constitution. So by changing the name of country and by definition who we are, all Macedonians in the region, not just in the Republic of Macedonia, then he actually did break the law, violated the Constitution. So
as you mentioned,
deal is not going to go through.
Okay, Peter Azovski, we've just heard an impassioned defense of why Macedonia should be called Macedonia from Bill Nikolov. He finds it offensive that this deal has been struck between the two foreign ministers. He doesn't think it's going to be passed through. He's not happy with what's happening. Tell me why you think he's wrong.
Well, I think we understand that for many people this is a very emotional issue, and we understand that this may be a bitter pill to swallow, especially for the Macedonian diaspora that's been going on forever. However, in light of the current events, it looks like this is the only way forward for the region and for the country. Over the past 12 years, we've seen a lot of downward sliding of the country, and this seems to be the only way to pave the forward way for the country right now. So in support of the deal, it'll open up EU and NATO perspectives. It'll open up probably new jobs, new real benefits for the people. And overall, looking at the deal, it seems that the benefits outweigh the sacrifices right now.
Okay, more than 68% of people polled said they're against the deal. Tell me the thinking behind that.
Yes, the thinking is that first, Greeks also are very worried to maintain somehow their historical identity. Cultural heritage is also protected by international law and international relations. The heritage of Alexander the Great is very important for the Greek people. Apart from that, we have a very uncomfortable history in the 20th century, the Greek Civil War, Slav Macedonians in Greece joining the Greek Communist Party, and the Communist Party at some point promising an independent Macedonia. So these are things that have a deep impact on people, on their emotional world and on their understanding of the world. However, I believe that the right compromise was struck with the agreement between the two prime ministers. I'm confident that Greece will not create a major problem by the ratification of the agreement when this happens, because by that time a dynamic will have been developed which would be so strong after Northern Macedonia will have finalized its own procedures that there will be no problem from the side of the Greeks.
Okay, so let's go to Bill. So Bill, you've heard two perspectives here. You've heard the one perspective saying, for our country, for Macedonia, from Peter's perspective, this will be better for us. NATO membership possibly, EU membership possibly. It's for the greater good, even though this is an emotive issue here. We've got an understanding from Achilles about what some Greeks are thinking, why they're opposed to it. Doesn't that even strengthen the case for the big, strong leadership that's taking place on both sides right now to let bygones be bygones and try and do something productive out of this? Because the name Macedonia will still be in that name.
Okay, so we're discussing, there's a 19-page document telling me who I am. Does that sound normal to you? Any other ethnic group, Think about it. If you were in this situation, you would demand, actually, you wouldn't have to demand that the world defend your right to exist, because the world would be defending your right to exist. Every time I meet with heads of state, Canadian, US, Western Europe, everything, the first thing they tell me is, if Macedonia stopped negotiating its name, we would defend your right to your own name. Macedonian Human Rights Movement International started an Our Name is Macedonia campaign many years ago. Look it up. There's a hashtag Our Name is Macedonia too. It demands an end to the name negotiations as a basic human right. And again, everything that the West claims to uphold, but they're violating it now. So if the Macedonian government, both major political parties, actually grew a spine and said, you know what, this has always been our name, we're not negotiating it, this issue would have died long ago. The vast majority of the world recognize Macedonia. We have one major oppressor. We got a few other ones too. Isn't that sad? The world sort of cares, but not necessarily. So Greece, our biggest oppressor, cares that I'm called Macedonian. Well, I don't care what Greece thinks. The world shouldn't care either. Our name is Macedonia. Now, to get to Peter's point, he admits that there is something wrong with the deal. That tells you everything right there. If there's something wrong with changing your name, don't do it. If you so desperately want EU and NATO membership, I could talk for hours about why that's not good. Austerity measures, ask our Greek associate. Or, I mean, he identifies as Greek, so I will call him that. I'm not a Northern Macedonian. I'm Macedonian, by the way. Anyway, you know what? Ask that. Why do you want membership in the EU and NATO, which will actually hurt Macedonia? But leaving that aside for a minute, there is one country, there is veto power by any country. Change the rule. I've met with foreign policy advisors who want to get Macedonia in at all costs, changing the name. How about change the veto rule? Force the oppressor not to use the veto rule, right? Example, Montenegro is in NATO. If Montenegro wanted to deny membership to a potential member, you think they would be allowed to do that? No. Treat Greece in the same way as the biggest human rights oppressor in Greece. We have won, paid for by Macedonian Human Rights Movement International, countless cases in the European Court of Human Rights demanding that Greece and Bulgaria recognize Macedonians' right to exist.
Okay,
the
so
UN,
fair enough.
independent
So,
expert Gay McDougall went, said the exact same thing.
Okay,
we
so
exist.
Bill, one of the problems I have here is I don't quite have the EU or NATO, for example, to answer for why it might be a good idea or not to change the rules, right? But Peter's made the argument that if we want to smooth the process, perhaps we can compromise. Let's go back to Peter now. Peter, you're hearing from Bill. Bill fundamentally believes, no matter what, that there's an erasure of identity here, that sovereignty and identity are under threat when it comes to changing the name. That's why it's a non-negotiable issue. Do you have sympathy for that?
I have sympathy for the emotion and the fervor and the vehement with which he defends his position. And I agree with the fact that the deal is not ideal. However, the problem is that we are not choosing between this deal and some abstract deal in the future. We're choosing between this deal and no deal. We're choosing between the future and the past. The way democracy works is that if you have 90% of the people willing to get into EU and NATO now, there's something that the government should be doing about this. And the benefit of the deal is not only the EU integration, because that's a transitory alliance. In fact, it's more than that. It's a method of initiation. It's showing that you can compromise on tough issues and thereby become a member of a bigger world global community. It's showing that you can resolve disputes without conflict by actually at the negotiating table. It is a tough deal for both Greece and Macedonia. In fact, I would argue that nothing from the deal actually detriments the Macedonian identity or the Macedonian ethnical feeling. I've read through the document a couple of times. There's absolutely nothing I can find apart from the addition to the actual name of the country that actually destroys or diminishes Macedonian identity to any extent. Overall, I would say it brings stability to the region. It paves up the way for a future resolution of Balkan conflicts without on the negotiating table. It shows that Greece and Macedonia can work past their differences, and it actually supports the growing up of the country.
Okay.
So in overall, I think that the benefits of the deal greatly outweigh the sacrifices, if any.
Okay, so we have Macedonians who don't want to be called anything other than Macedonia, even if it's within the name. And we have many Greeks who don't want their northern neighbor to be called anything that has the name Macedonia. And it's something that I'm struggling to understand, Achilles, is what's in it for Greece? Why has Tsipras done this? Because I see more potential benefits for the Macedonians if we look at NATO and the EU, even though Bill might disagree. What's in it for Greece?
I would like first to ask our friend from Canada not to use expressions the way he did.
No, what is my ethnic identity? I'm from Canada and I'm proud of it. What is my ethnic identity?
We have our own.
I'm your Macedonian friend if you want to be my friend. You can call me by who I am, please.
Treat the term Greek as an oppressor. Greek is a potential friend, is already a friend of Macedonia, and we are very happy to continue working with our northern neighbor in the European Union. Any other position leads Russia into the country. Every other solution leads Russia into the Balkans. And we know what happened in the Balkans with fanaticism of identity 20 years ago. We don't want these stories to come back in the future of our countries. We want all together, and this is the Greek Prime Minister's purpose, to establish a big European identity from the traditions, the historical traditions and the national traditions of all the peoples of Europe. And let me tell you something. If suddenly Germany would claim Peter the Great as their own, it would be laughable. Everybody would laugh. Nobody would take such a thing seriously. So let's be serious.
I'm sorry. Greece's position has changed since 1988. Listen, people, Macedonia was divided in 1913. Macedonia, okay? It is well known what Macedonia is and was, okay? So it was divided into 4 countries. One part is independent now. Greece used to deny the existence of Macedonia. They changed the name of all Macedonian villages and people from 1913 onwards. If Macedonia was always Greek, these villages and towns and cities would have had Greek names under the Ottoman Empire. As an example, the majority of my family comes from various parts of Macedonia. The main part is Aegean Macedonia, which is the part that Greece took over, and Mala Prespa, which is the part that Albania took over. So as an example, and I tweeted this, and I'm sure many of you saw it, my great-grandfather, Dedo means grandfather, Dedo Krsto, was born in 1903, the year of the Ilinden uprising against the Turks. He was Macedonian under Turkish occupation. From 1913 onwards, he was Macedonian under Greek occupation. When he moved to Canada, he was still Macedonian. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to diminish his memory and call him, posthumously, I forgot how to pronounce it, but to say that he is no longer Macedonian. Okay. Achilles, he was Northern Macedonian back then. We knew nothing but Macedonian and to be Macedonian.
Fair enough, Achilles.
And in terms of the European Union, Peter, I need to answer this.
Okay, hold on.
Peter, you want European Union membership,
Bill,
so that's fine. But
Bill,
it's not one or the other.
I don't have time for the EU now. I just want to get a final response from Achilles. We're out of time. Achilles.
I'm not here to discuss history, and it's not my business to come back, as I said, to discuss family trees. We have a future in Europe. We are in a crucial moment.
Discuss family what?
And I'm not going to play the game of nationalism, which is not far away from the Golden Dawn and from Marine Le Pen. This is the quality of the argument that wants to bring conflict.
That's impressive. That's impressive.
Not bring this conflict because we are here to protect peace and security in our continent. And the Greek Prime Minister and the Prime Minister of Northern Macedonia are doing their job very well, and this needs to be acknowledged.
Okay, gentlemen. I'm out of time. I would love to go on,
Peter,
but I cannot. I apologize.
When someone is called Northern Macedonian,
and that's why we've had this debate.
Macedonian?
Okay, that's why we've had this debate.
That implies that Macedonian
certainly, you've had an opportunity to
express
your opinion, and I'm thankful for you coming onto the program. Bill Nikolov, Achilles Kordas, and Peter Azovski, I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers.
What the parallel state must know and always remember is that there are many of us, because we are what is called a democracy, the popular will.
Romania has seen some of its largest demonstrations since the fall of communism. More than 100,000 supporters of the government took to the streets angry at alleged abuses by anti-corruption prosecutors. Several in the government have faced charges of fraud and abuse of power, including the leader of the country's ruling Social Democratic Party, Liviu Dragnea. He says he and other officials are being unfairly targeted by what he calls a parallel state. But the dismissal of the top anti-corruption prosecutor, as well as a parliamentary vote to reduce the punishment for convicted officials, has raised concerns that Dragnea's government is abusing the judicial system. So is Romania's justice system under threat? Well, to help answer this, I'm joined now from Bucharest by Vladimir Jonas. He's a former advisor to Romania's Prime Minister. Vladimir, is the justice system under threat?
If you are asking these questions to half of our society, yes, they will answer you the justice is under threat. If you're asking the other half, no, nobody is trying to destroy the fight against corruption or doing anything bad. They want only to make the laws more correct and more against or to stop the abuses. As was in your presentation told that the biggest rally in our modern history was here in Bucharest. All the persons who were here in Bucharest in the Victoria Square were here because they felt their way of living is under pressure. They weren't here to fight only against anti-corruption prosecutors or anti-Laura Codruța-Kövesi or the anti-corruption national department. They were here because they aren't satisfied by the way the life is in Romania in this moment. Unfortunately, in Romania, in the last 2 or 3 years, we are talking only about the prosecutors, Laura Codruța-Kövesi, what is trying the government to change in the justice laws and so on, but nobody is talking about what are the real problems in our country. If you are talking only about the prosecutors, yeah, everybody came here to say that we believe that the prosecutors are doing some abuses. And we can talk about some protocols, secret protocols between the intelligence and the anti-corruption department or other institutions from the justice department. But, you know, nobody said that we don't have in Romania a problem with this phenomenon, with the corruption. We have a very big problem. But we must understand and we must once and for all say if we agree to fight against corruption with any means and beside any law, or we need to fight against corruption taking care of the rule of law and to I don't know, respect every law. And this is the problem here, because in the last year we saw a lot of proofs that some prosecutors did abuses against some politicians. And okay, you can accuse anybody of anything, but if you destroy the career of a person and then that person is acquitted by the judges, you must respond.
Let me ask you very simply, does the parallel state exist or is it just made up?
Very good question. From my point of view, in each country exists a parallel state. We are seeing that in every country now, the new administration in the United States, in Turkey, in Romania, in many other countries, we hear about the parallel state or the deep state. What means this, the parallel state? It's a very good question, and I asked a lot of people and everybody gave me a different answer, because everybody sees this parallel state in his way. Some of them are telling me that the parallel state is, I don't know, a group of prosecutors with guys from intelligence and so on who are trying to decide what is the party who can run the country and be into the government. Others are saying that the parallel state is a group of politicians with intelligence and maybe some guys from the justice, like prosecutors or judges, who are trying to do the same thing. It's a very good question. From my point of view, the question is not if the parallel state exists, but who is the parallel state and who is part of this parallel state. And
okay.
Until now, I didn't heard a reasonable answer.
Well, if they're a good parallel state, you won't know who they are, right? Let me ask you very finally and very directly.
Exactly.
Is Romania a corrupt society from the top down?
No. We have a problem with this phenomenon, but all the countries in the world have this problem. I don't believe Romania is more corrupted than, I don't know, other country in this region. The problem with Romania is that our politicians brought the political fight outside of our borders, and they try to solve this problem about the corruption, this phenomenon, in the European Parliament, into the State Department, and everywhere they could, because they saw that they cannot solve this problem in Romania, because every time, look, the last general elections in Romania, the main opposition party had only one speech: we must sustain the fight against corruption and DNA. And the results were different than they expected.
I've got to wrap because I have to move on. But it's been fascinating hearing your insights about Romania. I thank you very much for joining us here. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, does Russia pose a new threat to Eastern Europe? We debate why several countries are asking NATO for help. Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.